So if you find this sleep story helpful or interesting, then give it a thumbs up, leave any comments that you've got below, and if you aren't already, subscribe to the channel and click the bell icon so you can receive notifications of when future sleep stories go live. I have dozens and dozens of stories already on my channel that you can go and search. I also release new stories every single week, so I hope you enjoy this story. So take a moment to allow your eyes to close and allow yourself to begin to relax. And as you begin to relax, I don't know whether you'll relax deeper to the sound of my voice or whether it'll be to the spaces between my words. And as you begin to relax, I'm just going to tell a story in the background. And it's a story about someone waking up one day. They head downstairs for breakfast. And it's really cold outside. But it's so nice and warm and toasty inside their home. And they go into their kitchen. They prepare themselves some slices of toast, smelling that smell of the toast cooking. Standing near that toaster while it cooks, watching as it pings up in the toaster, placing that down on the plate, spreading some soft butter onto that toast, that sound of the butter and the knife scraping across that toast. The smell of that butter melting into the toast. And they look at the different options of what they're going to put on the toast. They look in their cupboard, they see their jam, they see their Marmite, their honey, they see their chocolate spread. All different spreads, and they pick one out, pop open the jar, and spread that onto their toast, then cutting their toast into triangles, arranging them nicely on their plate, before walking through to their living room, sitting down by the fire. And while sitting by the fire, they can gaze outside, they can see out into their back garden. And as they look out in the back garden, they can see some frost on the grass, a little bit on the window, on the outside. They can see a robin landing in that frosty grass. And they look at that robin as it skips across the grass before it takes off again, landing up on the fence on the outside of the garden. And they can just faintly hear it singing outside the back door, outside through those patio doors that lead out onto the garden. And they can notice that the sun is beginning to rise. And as it begins to rise, so there's just the faintest mist rising from the grass. As they feel that crunch of the toast while they just sit there eating and relaxing. And they're wondering what they're going to do with their day. The weather's been unusually cold, so they've not really been out for a while. They've watched different films. They've read different books. But today it looks like the weather's starting to improve, starting to brighten up and warm up outside. And they decide to pick an atlas off their bookshelf, sit down, and start flicking through the pages, thinking about where they'd love to visit. And they look at the different pages, the different way the maps in the atlas are laid out. The feeling of turning those pages. And they decide that perhaps they would quite like to head north. Maybe go on a bit of a road trip. They haven't been out for a while, so they decide that that'll be something different to do, exploring somewhere they haven't been before. They put the films away that they've been watching the last few days. They smile as they look at the back of one of the cases, seeing that Marshmallow Man. And they put those films back on their shelf in exactly the right location, with a home for everything. They go through to a room that their cat is asleep in. Make sure the cat has plenty of food. They phone a friend to come and check on their cat over the next few days. Make sure they're well fed, well hugged and looked after. They wake their cat for a quick hug before setting off on their journey. And they're sure that their cat wasn't as keen about being woken as they were about waking it. And after the hug, the cat circles around, plops itself back down, and falls back asleep again. And they go out to set off on their journey. And they begin travelling north. And they decide that they're not going to use any kind of satellite navigation. They're not going to use a map app on their phone or anything like that. They'll find their own way. And so they start driving. And initially they're driving through built-up areas, plenty of houses around. Then after a while, it opens out into empty space, with just the occasional farm, or the occasional petrol station, a couple of other little shops along the road. And then it thins out even more, where they realise they can drive and drive and just see the same thing out of both windows, whether they look left or right. Just flat land, noticing some distant hilly areas, but nearby it's just long, flat land, with not a lot going on. And they find staring down a road where nothing seems to change. They get moments of tunnel vision, They get moments where they suddenly lose track of time. They lose track of the speed that they're doing, as everything just seems to be so samey. They even begin to wonder whether they should continue this journey. And they find it really unusual experience to seemingly be able to keep going on and on and on with the same view out of every window, feeling almost like they're on some kind of a treadmill or in a hamster wheel, where you just keep going and going and going, but nothing changes. And they try putting on music to distract them. They try listening to audiobooks, but all they keep focusing on is how nothing seems to change. Everywhere they look, it's just flat, with this long, straight road. The only thing that begins to change is that as the sun begins to set, the sky finally begins to change colour, from the blue that it's been for hours and hours and hours, gradually shifting to more oranges and reds. And they find this a relief, that the sky's finally changing colour, that there's something they can observe that's different. They haven't seen anywhere yet to stop though. But they feel perfectly fine and safe to pull their car off the road. They drive some distance off-road, away from the road, and they decide they're going to park up and spend the night in their car. They're pretty confident that there'd be no other cars around here, but if there were, they're far enough off the road that no other cars are likely to notice them at night time. And they set up a little campfire next to their car. They sit down on a jacket near that campfire. That crackling sound of the campfire, the dancing light, flickering flames, that warmth of that campfire that keeps them warm against the chill in the air. And they open a bag of marshmallows. They stab some with some sticks. And they cook up those marshmallows and eat those stringy marshmallows. They know it's not really a particularly substantial meal, but it's about all they had in their car. They didn't think about how far they'd have to travel between one shop and another, so they eat their way through that bag of marshmallows. And even though it's beginning to get cold, they decide to lie down for a moment. They decide that there's still a bit of warmth in the bonnet of the car, so they lie down on their bonnet of their car, the fire flickering out the corner of their eye, and they gaze up at the stars. They watch the occasional shooting star overhead. They notice the way certain stars twinkle. They see the flashing lights of planes passing very high overhead. They notice the satellites passing overhead. And they just watch that night sky, believing that as they watch, they can notice the movement of those stars. Not just the slight wobbling, but the actual movement of those stars circling around the North Star. And they focus all their attention on those stars. And then after a while, they see what looks like a satellite passing over. It doesn't look like an aircraft. And they notice that it then changes direction and looks like it's beginning to get larger in the sky. And at first, it's just a curiosity, something that grabs their attention for a moment, but not grabbing their attention enough for them to move or respond. Just something that they're now looking at. But as it begins to get larger and larger, they start noticing that it actually starts having some kind of definition. And then they can hear a slight, really low rumble, and almost feel a pressure pushing down on their body. Almost like a pressure of air waves, of the sound pulsing, very low frequency in their direction. And they watch as this thing gets lower and lower. And then they notice it getting incredibly close. And then a light comes on in the bottom. And it was already having a glow from the bottom, but now it has a light, more like a beam right in the centre. Now all of their attention is on this. As it gets closer and closer, and then they notice it's going to land not that far away. And they see that beam almost seeming to heat up the land beneath the craft as it comes into land. Almost like that beam is part of what's slowing down that craft. Maybe part of the landing procedures. And then it all goes silent. The beam shuts off. The glowing shuts off. And they've got curiosity now. So they decide to go and investigate. They start running in the dark in the direction that craft landed. They don't feel scared or nervous, just excited at what they've witnessed and curious about what they've witnessed. And the moon isn't out. It's just a blanket of stars overhead. So there's very little light. But as they start getting close to this ship, they can begin to notice the scale of it. That it's much larger than they thought it was as they saw it coming into land. But with nothing for reference, they hadn't realized how large it was. And they saw that there seemed to be an entrance into the ship that was open. And it looked like there was perhaps aliens that have come off of this ship, and that they're roaming around in this area. They seem to be picking up samples of soil, of bits of plant life. And while they're exploring, the person decides to just quickly have a look inside the ship. They thought any time they see photos of alleged alien ships, it's always a blurry photograph taken from a long way away, and it never looks convincing. And they knew that they couldn't get a good photo from outside, because clearly it would be too dark, and to be close enough for the flash to make any difference, you'd only get a tiny part of the ship, and it wouldn't look like a ship. So they thought, why don't they just get some photos of the inside of the ship? And so they sneak into that ship. And the first thing they notice is how dim everything is on the ship. How the lighting in the ship is almost like dawn or dusk. And they find their way down a corridor. Doors seem to open automatically for them. And there doesn't seem to be many aliens on this ship. And they walk into one room, and they think it kind of resembles a kitchen. They walk into another room, and it looks like it's full of controls, and so they assume this is what they would probably call the bridge. And then they start hearing some footsteps, and they hear a sound followed by a clunk. And they wonder if that was the main door shutting. They hear what sounds like talking, but they don't understand it. And they can hear footsteps down the corridor, heading their way. So they quickly hide themselves behind one of the panels. And then the aliens that were outside the ship come into the bridge, sit down at the different panels, can be heard communicating with each other, can be heard pressing different buttons. And then one of them looks like they've picked up a quartz crystal and placed it in a space with the hand on top of it, and then pushed it in, and as they do, it's almost like electric or some kind of blue lightning spreading out from that crystal across the channels on the control panel, illuminating that control panel, giving all the control panels an electric blue outline to all the buttons, and then a red light coming on next to one of the other aliens. They push the red light, and there's the slightest of jolts, and then silence. And then after a few moments, they notice this really bright light shining in through the front of this room. And then the window, or whatever it was that the bright light was shining in through, starts to darken itself. And they recognize that that bright light is the sun. And as they look in the direction of that bright light, they see that they're circling around the earth, and that as they're circling from the dark side of the earth around to the other side, the sun is appearing from behind the earth. And they realize in that split second they'd gone from being on the ground to being in space. And they watched in awe out the window, before suddenly realizing the situation they're in. And with that realization, they jump up from behind the panel and turn to face the aliens and start shouting and saying, "Hang on, I'm on your ship." And they notice that the aliens appear startled and seem to look at each other, and then look back at this person stood right in front of them. And then the aliens start talking, and there's something about their voice tonality that lets the person know that perhaps these aliens are a bit shocked by this situation. They can't understand the aliens, but something about that voice tonality seems to give away how they feel about this situation. And the person says that they don't understand. They don't understand what's being said. And the aliens don't immediately understand the person. And then one of the aliens walks over to what turns out to be a cupboard at the side, presses a button, the cupboard pops open. They take something out of that cupboard that's like a long kind of stick, and they point that stick towards the person. They start walking towards them. They press a button on that stick, and the person's a bit nervous about what's happening now, and starts talking and asking, what are they doing? And as the person talks, so they hear a sound coming out of the stick. But the sound coming out of the stick sounds like the aliens. And then the alien with the stick starts talking. And then a sound comes out the other end of the stick that sounds like a person. And they realise that this is some kind of translator. And they begin to have a dialogue. And the aliens say that when they fly from planet to planet, they gather samples to see if there's any life on those planets, and many planets. There's no life, but other planets, you think there's no life, and it turns out there's microbial life. There's other sorts of life that's too small to notice at first. And then some planets have an abundance of life, and they have to land in multiple places to gather samples, and that the samples contain a lot more than just what they've gathered the sample of. That there's a lot that can be gathered from the soil, and that they also try to get an idea of what other life is around that they don't want to interfere with, that might be more intelligent. And so at times they'll try and encounter that life, and they'll use this universal translator, which can actually pick up what it's pointing at. It's very directional and can pick up what it's pointing at from a huge distance. And they don't normally have to use it to translate the opposite direction. And they want to know what this person's doing on their ship. And the person explains that they're just curious. They saw it land, and so they had to go and investigate. And the aliens respected that curiosity. They recognized that this person's just doing essentially what they do. That out of curiosity, they go and investigate places. They land places and go places where no one's invited them to be, because they're curious and they want to learn. And the aliens decide that they want to take advantage of this situation to learn from this human. And this person wants to learn from them. And the aliens say there are certain things they can't share. Certain things that would be too advanced. Certain things that if they shared them, it could tip the balance of the progress being made, technologically. And the person understood this and explained about how that could be like people with computers, showing those computers to people during the Renaissance, that they wouldn't have a concept for how it works. And if someone ever did manage to figure it out, it would jump a huge chunk of knowledge building that helps with the deep understanding. And so the person and these aliens engaged with each other for a while before the aliens said they're going to have to take this person back to where they came from. That they obviously can't remain on the ship. And the person wanted to spend a lot more time on this ship, and thought that it sounded really exciting to just travel from planet to planet. They wanted to know more information about how this ship can travel through space to all of these different planets. Given how far apart they are, and what kind of lifetime that travel would happen in, and what propulsion these aliens were using. And the aliens said that one thing they could say is that propulsion is the wrong way to think about it. The propulsion will never get you anywhere quick enough. That it's more about being in point A and then being in point B. And less about travelling from point A to point B. And in no time at all, that ship was back where it came from, and the person was walked to the exit. They walked out of the exit, started walking away from the ship. And they felt a pressure pass through them, heard a low rumble. And as they turned around, they saw there was no ship there anymore. And they walked back to their car. And they saw that fire still burning. And they put the fire out, climbed into their car, lowered the seat, and decided to just make the most of this last few hours before dawn, to drift and float asleep. But as they were drifting asleep, so their mind was still preoccupied with their experience. All that talk to themselves about how bad photos are of alien craft, all that UFO footage that's always blurry, or distant, or so up close that you can't really make out what's in it. And they just went and talked to aliens and forgot to get their phone out and take any photos. And all they've got are their memories. And as they fall asleep, they wonder whether they'll end up thinking it was just a dream by the morning. And the next morning, they could feel the sun shining through their car windscreen onto their face. They could notice that light passing through their eyelids. They woke up feeling a bit stiff in that car seat, left their car to stretch their legs for a bit, and stretch their back and their arms, before getting back into their car to continue their journey north. And while making their journey north, they phoned up their friend to check that their friend has been checking on their cat. Their friend reassured them that their cat's perfectly fine. They carried on their journey, eventually passing into some deep forest the tall trees, densely packed together. They continued going through that forest. And after a long drive, the terrain began to change, began to become more hilly. They could notice that it was getting significantly colder outside of their car. They saw a little shop which they stopped off at, grabbed themselves some snacks, made sure that they had everything they thought they would need, and then carried on their journey. And then they found this clearing among the forest, where some of the trees had been cut down. There was a bit of a meadow, and there was a view down over a lake. They decided to stop up here, have something to eat. And while they stopped, just on the edge of that forest, in that meadow, looking out from the top of this hill down over that lake, looking at the way the sunlight danced on the surface of the lake, they could see the way squirrels were chasing each other around the trees, hearing their claws as they scampered. They could see birds circling overhead. And they're aware how cold the air was here. And they knew that they weren't that far off, being as far north as they wanted to travel. And they felt that it was probably the other end of that large lake down there. That's probably where they'll stop up. So after having a break, having something to eat, they jumped back into their car, continued their journey. A few hours later, travelling along the side of that lake, and sometime later as the sun's beginning to set, arriving at a cabin that they've booked to stay in for a little while, just for a couple of nights. And the first thing they do is have a nice warm drink in the cabin, sit in front of the fire for a while, before heading outside long after the sun has set. And they're wrapped up, really warm. They recline back on a seat, and they watch the aurora in the sky, watch that light dancing and moving around, the occasional shooting star, watching those satellites pass overhead, being reminded with each satellite of their experience with the aliens, aware that no one would probably believe them if they told anyone. And as that night progresses, so they notice the full moon just beginning to appear over the horizon, and that low down moon adding silver shimmers to the surface of the lake. with that silver shimmering, rippling with the gentle breeze across the lake. They walk down to the lake's edge, and they can see the way the water is just gently rolling onto the stones at the edge of the lake, and then rolling back. And they can see those stones are rounded from years and years and years of being rolled gently onto the shore and gently back into the lake. Almost like those stones are just turning in place. And as they crouch down to get closer to that water, they notice that it almost sounds like the stones are talking to them, the way they're just rolling onto the shore and crunching on each other and rubbing together, as their brain notices patterns in the sounds that are made by those stones across the shore. Almost like a slightly crunchy voice as the stones rub together, a bit like rubbing wet stones between the palms of your hands. And while they're crouched down, they pick up some of the larger stones, and they decide to leave their mark here. And just in this really shallow water at the edge of the lake, they use those larger grey stones, placing a large stone on the bottom, then almost in a mindful, focused state, they begin to balance some of the stones on top of each other. Making stacks of stones that look almost impossible to be standing. And they do about 3 stacks of stones that look almost gravity-defying, taking immense amounts of patience and a connection with those stones, with feeling the stones, feeling the centre of gravity with each stone as they pick it up and hold it and move it around. And as they make the tip of the stone make contact with the stone beneath it, and then feeling for just the point where that stone is just right, where they can begin to gently move their hands away, leaving that stone resting there. And they wonder how long these stones will remain standing, and what other visitors will think if they discover them here, standing in these positions. And just as they begin to hear the first sounds of a songbird in the morning, they head back into the cabin. They go to bed and drift comfortably asleep. And the next day they wake up, they go outside, they can see those stones still standing. They walk along the lake a little way. They've got the forest along one side of them, travelling up hills. and then an area of no trees down to the lake. And they walk their way around the lake. They sit down on some of the large stones, wondering how those large stones got there. Noticing some of the moss-covered stones, feeling the softness of the moss. And they see next to one stone is the most pristine looking white rose with a red ribbon tied around the stem. And they wonder about that white rose as they take a look at that and place it back. And they've come to see what it was that they've seen. They wanted to see the aurora for the first time. They thought that would be a magical experience. They wanted to have an experience of doing something different. And they certainly got that. Although there was a point on their journey where they thought they wouldn't, where they thought the whole journey might just be in a monotonous drive. And yet, they've been in an alien spaceship. They've seen the aurora. They've come to this most beautiful location. This location where no one else is here currently. And they're staying in this cabin. And they've got this lake to themselves. There are no other cabins around this lake. And after sitting on that stone for a while, just hearing that sloshing of the water lapping the shore, and noticing a very slight mist across the surface of that lake, they decide to walk into the forest a little, noticing the sound of their footsteps on the stones, and then on grass, and then slightly crunchy as they enter the forest, and noticing the quality of the sound change as they enter into the forest, and the atmosphere change as everything darkens slightly in the forest. But the way shards of sunlight still manage to occasionally break their way through the canopy, dancing in front of them. And they enjoy just walking a little deeper and deeper into the forest. And they walk slowly and quietly, trying to barely make a sound, so that they can really enjoy nature without disturbing that nature. And they catch a glimpse of what looks almost like a silver fox, just plodding along, that stands out against the browns and the greens in the forest. And they watch that for a while as it walks past, and then heads off in a different direction. They hear a bird launching itself out of a tree, the flapping sound of its wings, almost like it's somehow trying to punch its way through the canopy. As a single fluffy white feather slowly moves left and right and circles round, coming down in front of them, being caught in a glint of sunlight as it falls to the forest floor. And as they walk deeper into the forest, so they discover a door. And it's a door that's in a tree. And they decide to walk through that door. They open the door. And at the other side of that door just seems to be rolling hills and a track leading all the way to a tall white palace. There seems to be a river that's weaving its way through the hills that passes straight past the front of that palace, and then travels off around the side of the palace and then off into the distance, continuing its weaving through the hills. And this person wonders about the validity of the experience. They've never found a door in a tree before, and they walk through that door, and they turn round to look at where they've come from. And as they turn around, they see a door frame here on a hill, and they walk around that door frame. And it just looks like a door frame. And yet with the door open, in the centre of the door frame is that forest they've just come from. But here it just looks like a door frame. And they see someone up on the hill, not far from this door frame. And they think it's curious that there should be someone just where they appear. And they walk over to that person, and as they get closer they notice the person's painting. They're painting that view, they're painting that palace. And that person's incredibly polite and friendly. Asks if they want to paint too. That sometimes you can get your ideas down on canvas and you can paint the reality you want. You don't have to paint the reality you see. And you look at their painting, and you notice the differences between their painting and the view that they were painting. And so you decide to stand next to them, and while talking to them, you begin to paint. And they're incredibly engaging, and you're curious who they are, why they're here. And they explain that they knew they had to be here to meet this person. And this person wanted to know how. And they said they didn't know, they just knew. They had this feeling like they needed to be up on this hill right now. And they knew when they're up on this hill they had to occupy themselves. They didn't want to just sit here twiddling their thumbs. And so they decided to paint. And they thought that when this person arrives, maybe they'll want something to do. So they thought they would bring along some additional art stuff. They said this is all an experience to teach this person something about appreciating moments, even moments that seem boring and uneventful. That it's all too easy to want to chase the next high, chase the next event, but sometimes you need to be able to slow life down and appreciate what you've got in the moment. And they felt painting was a good way to do that. And the person began painting the view. And they tried to get the hills just right. They tried to get the perspective just right. They tried to get the palace just right. And this painter leant over and said, "Don't try and get it right. Try and paint what you feel. Paint what you believe you see, not what you do see." And so the person began to alter their painting. They began to add emphasis to that palace which stood out for them. They began to add emphasis to the way that water seemed to weave its way through the landscape and almost be like a focal point guiding their attention from where they are down to the palace and then off into the distance. And they began to place less emphasis on those hills, but more emphasis on the difference of colours of the hills. They started to notice that although their brain assumed the hills were all the same green, all the same grass, they're now noticing that those hills in the distance look a different colour to the hills here that they're sitting on. And they started painting in a different way. And they began to get absorbed in this moment, in this peaceful and relaxed moment. And the painter shut up and just smiled and let them paint. And together they painted for quite a while. And the painter told them that they could take that painting back with them. And that it's their time to go home. And the painter packed up and left. And the person took the painting, walked back through that door, closed that door behind them, and found themselves back in that forest. And they walked through that forest, headed back towards the cabin. They arrived back at the cabin. They placed that painting up on the fireplace so that they could have a good look at it, to try and analyse what it is they'd done this painting of. They hadn't yet worked out in their mind how this experience was possible. But they knew they've got a painting out of it, so it must have been real. And as they looked closely at their painting, they noticed that the way they'd painted that palace wasn't just white, but it almost looked like it was made of ice. It almost looked like it reflected and glowed on the horizon in the light and really stood out against the landscape. And they noticed that somehow they'd also managed to paint in a little figure of someone standing there over near that palace. And they drifted in their own world while they were painting. They almost got so absorbed in the painting that they lost awareness of the fact that they were painting. And they looked closer at that figure, and they thought that's an incredibly detailed figure to have drawn. But they couldn't look closely enough, so they got their phone and they took a photo of that figure in their painting, and then pinched that photo on their phone and zoomed in on it. And the more they zoomed in, the more that figure began to look almost holographic, almost like it somehow was 3D and stood out on their painting. And they couldn't understand how it was possible to have painted that, and what this meant. And they went to their painting, and they touched that figure to try and feel that painting, to see what that was painted with. And as they touched that figure with their finger, so this hologram appeared in the cabin with them. And then the hologram turned out to be the aliens, and that they said that they were trying to give this person a learning experience and a way of communicating and checking up on that experience. And that when they were walking through that forest, they'd used certain sound waves to begin to influence their neurology. And then they're able to give them an advanced experience, almost like a hallucination. And they used an example of it being a bit like being able to create an alternate reality for them, a bit like a computer game. Only this allowed them to be able to do a mix of reality and simulation together to see how they would respond. And they'd place them in an environment, a bit like being in a computer game that you can interact with. And the person thought to themselves that this almost could be perceived like magic, that if it was seen by someone who didn't know about computers, didn't know about the progress of technology, you could definitely take it as almost being magical. And so they wondered how this painting was done, and they explained that that was part of the experience, that everything they were perceiving through their senses was made up by their senses via the sound waves that were messing with their neurology. But it was interacted with real items, and there was no real door in a tree. It was actually a door into this alternate area. And the person found this fascinating, that these aliens wanted to learn how humans responded, about human behaviour, human consciousness. And knew that this person also wanted to learn about consciousness. And the aliens said that they were nowhere near there now, and that they'll leave this painting with them. That if they want to communicate, they can just press that hologram. It'll respond to the DNA through your skin, through that touch. So anyone else touching it, it'll just be like someone must have made a hologram and stuck it on the painting. But if they touch it, it's actually an advanced technology. It'll respond to that DNA. And then that'll allow it to monitor the environment they're in before deciding whether they allow that communication. Because they still don't want to disrupt the path of human progress. And then that hologram fades. And they keep that picture up on their mantelpiece, up above the fire, while they go off to bed, knowing the next day they're travelling back home. And they sleep so deeply, so soundly. And then wake up the next morning feeling so refreshed. They pack everything back into their car, including this painting. They glance over at those stones still standing on the edge of the lake. And they start their journey home. And as they journey home, so they journey back, up near that meadow, seeing how butterflies and other insects are flying in and out of flowers here now, as they travel through the forest, and then out into that open area again. Only this time they're preoccupied with the thoughts of the experience that they've had. And after a long drive, stopping off part way, but this time stopping off at a little motel rather than just sleeping in their car, and then continuing their journey. And as they get nearer to home, they start thinking about their cat, wondering whether their cat has missed them, imagining the cat probably has barely moved while they've been away. And as they arrive home, they notice the cat sat on the mat right behind the front door, meowing away, and then it leaps up and scrambles up their trouser leg and scrambles up into their arms and starts purring. And they try to put the cat down, but it keeps jumping up and clinging on, and they realise that the cat's missed them. So they hold on to that cat, and they just stroke that cat in their arms as they pick up their post, place it down on a side, and they head through and into the living room. They manage to get the cat down onto the floor. And they make themselves a drink, and they feel so pleased to be home, that they've enjoyed their experience, but at the same time, they enjoy being back home in the comfort of their home. They hang the picture on their wall in their living room, and they know it's not the greatest piece of artwork, but they're really proud of it, and they know the deeper meaning behind what it is. And they know that that's a secret that they'll be keeping, most likely for years. And then they go through to the room with the cat's bed. And while they're walking through to that room, they phone up the friend who have been looking after their cat, who tells them the cat's been fine. And as they are talking to that friend, they see the cat back on its bed, and they're curious about this tiny little pyramid that's next to that cat, and they talk to this friend about it, and the friend says they don't know what they're talking about, that's nothing to do with them. And then the cat seems to almost knock that pyramid away, as if it's almost trying to hide that pyramid behind its bed. And the person smiles, thinking that's just ridiculous, as they say goodbye to the friend. They make sure the cat has enough food and water. They go out into their garden. They sit down in the garden. And they drink a warm drink, gazing down their garden, still having thoughts about the experience they've been on. Then that night they head up to bed and drift comfortably and relaxed asleep.